Leslie's voice cut through the tight air with a stinging hurt that made me wince. It's not that easy. Are you embarrassed of us? Normally flaming with desire for me, those fire eyes were suddenly clouded with hesitation. What is it, Mary? Am I merely a test subject? As she turned away, I grabbed her and spun her back, and the abrupt contact made my resistance die. The searing accusation hung heavy. Our mouths were inches apart, and her lips were nearly touching her body obediently as her wild and familiar aroma enveloped me. She was just a breath away from kissing me to make everything right. But suddenly her eyes hardened. She said, "What did Leslie say that changed everything?" With a chilling resolution that replaced the hurt. Subscribe immediately and click. I signed the divorce papers, and you won't want to miss the shocking revelation in tomorrow's program. My lawyer nodded with the flick of my wrist that seemed too easy and too definitive to end an 8-year marriage. Without looking into my eyes, Vincent's attorney gathered the documents with approval. That was Mary Ross in the past. At the age of 38, Mary Cox is now officially unattached. Congratulations, my lawyer murmured. I nodded, grabbed my purse, and left the office even though her tone suggested a burial rather than freedom. Without glancing at Vincent, his liaison with his helper, who was in his 20s, had been the last rift in our already broken marriage. But in reality, before that fall air hit outside Fort Worth, we had been strangers sharing a bed for years. I took a big breath of freedom, mixed with fear as my phone buzzed and sent a text from National Geographic stating that, at least for my career, tomorrow's meeting on my wildlife series hadn't flopped on the couch at my new apartment, where boxes were still all over the place, along with my marriage. As I glanced at the ceiling with my blonde hair flowing across my face, the emptiness I had anticipated felt more like an abyss. Damn it, I mumbled as I reached for the closest bottle of wine, eagerly indulging myself, and without bothering to pour myself a glass. There are thousands of flawless wildlife photos in my phone's gallery, but there isn't a single joyful picture of Vincent. And last year, I woke up at the crack of dawn with my head thumping to another email. The timing of Worth Nature Reserve's call for photos for their conservation campaign had always been impeccable. Been my haven, the reserve, which was located just outside the municipal limits and covered acres of protected wilderness. As I hiked toward the falcon nests, I felt the familiar weight of the early camera bags hanging over both shoulders. Grounds. Hours were spent in silent communication with my camera before the ideal moment arrived. When a peregrine falcon is thrown from its perch with its wings spread brilliantly against the background, photographers are enthralled. I caught the sun mid-flight, with each feather having a unique eye that was fierce and primal. Intensity. Tears suddenly welled up in my eyes as I went over the image. Despite my recently signed documents, I plummeted to the bottom because Falcon looked so darn free. With the ground camera gripped to my chest, I allowed myself to cry uncontrollably so that no one could see or judge me. My phone rang unexpectedly, and I felt an unexplainable sadness for something I'd intended to stop. This weekend is the Reserve's annual fundraiser, according to my representative, who mentioned without a prelude that I'm not prepared for public appearances, Mary, but I would like your Falcon series to be the focal point. This might be tremendous. Blotting my eyes, you must have this. The Driscoll Foundation provides half of the... I paused as I watched the falcon return to its natural habitat in Texas's wildlife projects. Just keep me away from the divorce vultures later that evening, and everything will be okay. As I gazed at my laptop's falcon photos, I understood that my agent was correct. The reserve project couldn't have arrived at It was preferable for me to immerse myself in something significant, something wild and untamed, something that served as a reminder that I dozed off with my camera next to me on the pillow where Vincent's head used to lay, knowing that shattered objects may still fly. Without understanding that the fundraiser might alter, I dreamed of wide-open spaces and the odd comfort of beginning afresh. Everything I believed to be true about myself was in the glass at the annual benefit for the Fort Worth Nature Reserve. Rich benefactors mixed with exotic plants in a domed conservatory while feigning concern for nature. I felt like an imposter amid the social elite, so I modified my rarely used cocktail dress for conservation. My larger photographs of falcons adorned the foyer, eliciting grateful muttering that did little to ease my anxiety. Mary Ross applauded. The way a woman in a sophisticated green dress arrived with a champagne glass in her hand is amazing in your Falcon series. You caught the moment of flight. It's like witnessing freedom itself. I prepared my normal artist smile pleasantly. Reaction to the event coordinator's request for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, made by tapping a microphone. As we welcomed Reserve Manager Leslie King to provide an update on our conservation efforts, the audience turned to when a stunning woman with blazing red hair took the podium on the small stage. I anticipated the usual dry conservation. Funding for speech statistics is needed, so kindly donate what I received. Leslie started without a prelude, and as a result, we lost 3 mountain lions this year due to illegal hunting, not in some far-off desert, but here 30 minutes from now. Her voice was so distinct and powerful that the room fell silent. She spoke like someone who had held dying creatures in her hands, rather than like a bureaucrat from where you are standing. As she talked about her team's efforts recovering injured predators, her passion was unadulterated and captivating. The brilliance of the green eyes flashes caused me to automatically lift my camera before recalling we don't protect nature because it's pretty, she added, pointing to my pictures of falcons. We protect it because we lose something fundamental in ourselves when we lose our wildness. Her eyes roamed the room before briefly locking with mine, with unexpected candor before continuing. And when she was done, the clapping was sincere rather than courteous, pattern that these occasions typically produced. I found myself applauding more loudly than I should have, while observing her elegantly, left the podium right away, surrounded by admirers. She's not just an event coordinator, is she? Leslie, who showed up next to me, declined 3 job offers from national parks with larger budgets, stating that this land is in. I nodded while continuing to observe her across the room. And her speech was, Leslie explicitly asked for your Falcon series for tonight, so go ahead and introduce yourself. She's a admirer of your work. But before I could reply, prospective customers surrounded me and Leslie was gone when I looked again. And as the evening went on, my smile became more phony with each, speaking with those who couldn't distinguish between a hawk and a handsaw, about aperture settings and wildlife habits. I fled to a peaceful balcony with a view of the reserve, the chilly night air on my skin, and the just perceptible stars through Fort Worth's light pollution. But after the bright event, lights hiding too, the darkness seemed soothing. A voice may be heard from. Leslie King walked forward in the balcony's corner, her profile illuminated by the moonlight. Just needed air, I said, suddenly aware of my accelerated heartbeat. She said, your speech was incredible. Her smile changed her. Your photos speak louder than my words ever could, she said gravely as she stepped closer to examine me with those striking, green eyes. I'd want to show you a few locations of the reserve that are off limits to visitors with cameras. Might record things that I'd like to hear myself say, but my reports never do. Yet taking on additional work was, she said, the last thing I needed in this divorce chaos is tomorrow morning. The challenge in her voice made me smile. Unless you city photographers only work in well-lit areas and take coffee breaks. Sincerely, I'll bring the coffee that evening at morning. She held out her hand, and when our fingers touched, I felt a sudden shock that wasn't related to static. Until tomorrow, Mary Ross said, referring to electricity and the way her eyes met mine for an excessive amount of time, remarked, then disappeared back into the gala, leaving me to wonder what I had just committed to over the course of the following 2 weeks. Leslie was a revelation while traversing the forest, and I spent more time at the nature reserve than in my own apartment. My camera adored her because she had a serene confidence that put even the most nervous animals at ease around her. Feigned that I was just drawn to her figure by the lighting or the composition. You should go closer. Leslie guided us more slowly as we followed a family of deer through the morning mist, showcasing her flowing and patient animals can sense when you're in a hurry. So I changed my strategy to imitate her elegant stoop. I was able to record a number of private family moments as her fawns because the doe lifted her head but stayed down. Perfect, Leslie muttered, nursing close by, her breath warm across my ear. I was unaware of how close she had come to watch my technique, and her closeness gave me a sudden chill. Because, while examining the photos at the reserve's research center, Leslie leaned. I immediately ascribed to the early chill. She pointed to a picture where her red hair was sliding forward over my shoulder and brushing against my cheek. That one, she said, with her palm extended toward a nearby bird. She stood silhouetted against the sunrise and said, you've made me appear like a wildlife whisperer of some sort. I just capture what's there, I said, attempting to ignore the fact that she was smelling something. It was hard to concentrate because of how earthy and clean it was, and my phone kept ringing. I excused myself and went outside as soon as Vincent's name appeared on the screen. Without saying hello, he stated, I need the Nikon wildlife lens package, the one we bought in Colorado. Hello to you too, he said. I reacted angrily right away, saying, that's my equipment we bought. I have the Smithsonian assignment in Alaska next month. Mary, and you only received it because of me. Contacts. According to the divorce documents, I maintained my photography gear, but Vincent he sounded worn out and always put his career before mine. Can't we do this? I hung up without responding, feeling angry and elderly. I'll return it in perfect shape. I didn't realize I was crying until Leslie showed up next to me, writing with worry, scars bursting to the surface. She asked, putting a napkin over her face. I have bad news about my ex-husband drama. Expressed that I was embarrassed by my emotional outburst and that I would never apologize for. She expressed her feelings by putting her hand softly on my shoulder. I was astonished by her understanding when I looked up what made your photography so effective. He wants my best telephoto, and his emerald eyes kept mine steady and understanding. Since we were married when I purchased it, the lens I acknowledged claims that it is partially his. Men frequently mistake access for ownership, whether it's ladies or the woods, she replied, her mouth curved into a wry smile. Leslie's warm, grounding hand was still on my shoulder when she finally said it, which made me giggle. I have an old cabin on the north edge of the reserve, she replied, and as I took it away, I felt as though I had lost something tangible. Suddenly, if you want to try night photography tomorrow, I could show you a great spot for capturing nocturnal predators. I should have made a previous promise and kept it, but the invitation felt heavy with something that wasn't spoken. Instead, I heard myself accept the night I dreamed of, despite professional restrictions. I woke up, confused, and reached across the empty bed before realizing Vincent was gone. Green eyes and soft hands had passed long before he really left, and the knowledge was met with a sudden sense of relief rather than suffering After packing my camera equipment for the night shoot, I erased Vincent's number from my phone by hovering my finger over his name, rather of ringing back regarding the lens. I was learning that some connections needed to be broken entirely before new ones could be made, could completely develop, and the idea of Leslie waiting for me at the cabin made my heart skip a beat. Even I wasn't persuaded by the deception, so I told myself it was just excitement about the next photography prospects. Leslie's cottage was not the primitive shack I had envisioned. Instead, it was a carefully created building that merged perfectly with the forest floor around it, with windows facing east. My grandfather constructed a little clearing where animals congregated at sunrise. Leslie, she walked around the room and explained, putting down my equipment bag. I had remodeled last year using sustainable materials. At 4:00 me will leave with the coyotes after igniting the wood stove with comfortable familiarity and practiced actions. We spent the evening setting up camera traps and testing night vision because they are most active before daylight. Equipment, and as night fell, Leslie opened a bottle of wine to see things from a different angle, drank slowly as I watched her discuss the reserve's breeding program, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I found myself observing her as passion changed her hands moving expressively, and her voice full of conviction. Lips, instead of hearing her ask, "Am I boring you?" she asked abruptly. I said too hastily, "Not at all," adding, "I'm just observing professional habit." She leaned over to refill my glass with a smile that suggested she didn't quite believe me. "Describe your photography to me. How did you get started?" I didn't talk about my roots very often, but something about her being paid attention forced me to open up, and I shared with her how my father had given me my first camera as a gift. Before he vanished from my life, how I had gotten away by documenting instances when reality got too tough, just like Vincent had originally, championed my career before progressively sabotaging it, Leslie said, shifting to sit. "He sounds intimidated by your brilliance." I acknowledged that I lingered too long on the couch next to me, since some people can't stand in another person's light without attempting to lessen it. "We're all drawn to familiar patterns," she said, attempting to repair something that was never complete in the first place, softening even those that were detrimental. The discussion turned to her life by her father, a park ranger. Following the death of her mother, she holds degrees in biology and environmental management because her lovers were unable to comprehend her commitment to the reserve, saying, "People constantly want more of me than I. The land takes so much already. But you can give," she added, looking into the flames. "Continue to give. I noticed in the way you engage with everything when our gazes locked." She reached out and gently brushed a lock of hair away from my face. Finger contact was brief but electric, and as soon as it started to rain, a thunderclap disturbed the silence, started pounding on the roof without notice during one of those unexpected Texas downpours that changed the scenery in a matter of minutes there. Leslie grumbled as he moved to the window lighting. "Goes our pre-dawn shoot." I joined her camera, illuminating her form and her red hair, which was flaming like embers. Her hand, she turned to capture her profile against the storm-lit woodland. She made fun of my professional practice by saying, "You're photogenic," to which I replied, "Just the camera sees." Before I could respond to a particularly forceful gust, I saw what I see and wondered what it was. Caused rainfall to trickle through a half-open window, soaking us both. We hurried to shut it while giggling. Leslie's laughing faded as she added, "You're soaked." after we clashed in our hurry, observed that my shirt was sticking out transparently, so she gulped and looked aside, saying, "I'll grab towels and something dry too." We changed awkwardly when she brought back comfortable flannel shirts and towels, maintaining the space that had previously existed between us while she assisted me in drying my hair. Her fingertips lingered, her green eyes darkened as they met mine in the mirror. "Mary," and she pressed against my neck for longer than was required before starting her. My phone rang loudly. Vincent again, and I ignored it. But the moment was broken, and we slept in different rooms with the storm howling outside while an other type of, as the tension inside the cabin walls increased. I listened to Leslie moving around in the adjacent room while I slept, wondering what if the phone hadn't rang, and more unsettlingly, why I was so concerned you should try the study. A week following the cabin event, my buddy Gwendolyn remarked over coffee that they're doing at the university Leslie's. Since the divorce, my cousin has unexpectedly become my confidant. This is for persons who have recently ended a long-term relationship. I don't need therapy. Relationships pay $200. I rolled my eyes. Therapy, a study on reclaiming one's identity after separation. I couldn't resist pushing a flyer across the table. And you've been acting strangely recently, jittery and distracted. Though I hadn't spoken to Leslie since that rainy night, I was still thinking about her because something about her presence seemed uneasy. I pocketed the flyer since I wasn't prepared to analyze it. But the psychological department's waiting area was frigid and sterile, and I filled out countless forms just for the money, surveys of my marital emotional state and prospects for the future in the height of boredom. Dr. Ella Vernon, the researcher who called me, was younger than I had anticipated and had keen eyes and a straightforward approach. This experiment makes use of a novel method that taps into her subconscious inclinations, outlined how we're researching how people's true aspirations manifest after placing electrodes in my temples. As she calibrated equipment, I questioned, what exactly does that mean? Relationships end. After trauma, your conscious mind creates boundaries, she said, but this allows us to see through them. What happened next was, as a machine recorded my brain activity, strange images flashed on a screen too swiftly for me to notice. Following that, Dr. Werner looked over the findings with interest and whispered what I, suddenly feeling agitated, she handed me a chart with colored bars that signified, witness this increase in your subconscious reactions to various relationship dynamics, which happened when we displayed pictures of non-traditional collaborations, indicating that your most favorable responses were matter-of-fact. She stated to same-sex couples, especially women with traits. She displayed an image of a self-assured outdoor environment that seemed similar to this profile. It might have been Leslie's silhouette, but I was acting professionally. That's ridiculous, I said hastily. I'm straight, she responded. Many people discover aspects of their sexuality later in life. She had been married to a man for 8 years, without passing judgment, particularly in cases where prior relationships necessitated repressing genuine desires. I left. Leslie's face kept popping up in the psychology building, making me feel as though someone had yanked the earth out from under me. I remembered the tension in the cabin that night, her bright green eyes, and how her palm had felt on my neck. I felt drawn to her, and the prospect was both thrilling and terrifying because I lacked a framework for nothing in my meticulously planned existence had prepared me for these emotions. And my phone buzzed with a text from, bringing your camera around 5 in the morning. Leslie found a new fox den close to Northridge. Every conversation with her now seemed weighted. And tomorrow I glanced at the message with my heart thumping unreasonably. Was I projecting these emotions because they were suggested by an academic study, or had they existed in the first place, buried beneath layers of social expectations and my personal dread all along? I didn't reply, so I went to a route that was on the other side of the reserve from where Leslie usually goes and hiked till my legs hurt. But the physical strain didn't stop me from thinking, so that night I stayed away from I put myself into revising the Falcon series rejection at the Reserve's Research Center, where Leslie would be working late, for reasons I couldn't explain. I had plenty of excellent pictures of Leslie when my phone chimed once more at midnight. Everything is okay. I missed you today. 3 simple words made my heart race. With my phone soaring, I shut it off without answering and opened a glass of wine. But the queries persisted, coming, if I had ever selected Vincent, because he was more what I felt I ought to want than what I truly desired, genuinely wanted him, or simply the concept of the life he symbolized by dawn. I decided that in order to regain my identity, I would take missions far away and put Leslie on the reserve. I emailed my agency to request out-of-state work on familiar territory before doubting basic pieces of myself. The response was prompt, and I confirmed that National Geographic needed me in Wyoming the following week. ignoring the emptiness in my chest as soon as I considered leaving without providing an explanation. I made some discoveries. We're too unstable to confront directly. I required time and space, which I didn't have. Recognize that the one path that is sure to fail is running away from oneself. Wyoming was lovely and desolate, and it did. For 2 weeks, I had nothing to do but take pictures of elk herds traveling while avoiding Leslie's progressively worried texts that felt like accusations. Why are you avoiding me? What did I do? I answered all of them correctly, convincing myself that this distance was required to be professional and mature. Although magazine editors praised my work, they kept asking why I seemed preoccupied, and I couldn't even come up with a coherent response. Leslie's number rang on my phone on my last day in Wyoming, and I almost ignored it to voicemail, but for some reason, I had to respond. You're alive then, she continued. Good to know I've been working, she said in a tense voice, and I muttered after 2 weeks. The hurt in her voice was evident even though she didn't reply to any of my texts. I closed my eyes and whispered, We are, as shame swept over me. I thought we were at least friends. Mary. Friends don't disappear without a reason. A pause if you would want. I can be at the observatory tower tomorrow at sunset. Before I could reply, she hung up, so I took a plane back to Fort Worth and explained what the hell is happening. I'll be there. My stomach churned with worry that night. It would be wise to discontinue this acquaintance in order to preserve professional distance instead. And the next night I had to drive to the reserve. 3 people stood in the observatory tower, practicing explanations that all sounded vacuous. I saw Leslie's shadow at the top of the reserve, which is a few stories high and has expansive views of the surrounding area. She was wearing her job uniform, which included khaki slacks and the reserve's forest green shirt, near the railing when she noticed me. Without turning, she continued, I didn't think you'd come, her red hair glistening in the sunset's golden light. I apologize for going missing, and I joined her at the railing, being cautious to maintain a safe distance. Why did you do that? When green eyes finally locked with mine, I turned away to see a hawk circle idly underneath us. I took part in the findings of a psychological study on post-divorce identity were unclear. They implied that I might not know myself as well as I believed I grasped, which was confusing given how her voice grew a little softer. The realization that I might have attractions I've never acknowledged appeared in her eyes as she tightened the railing. I'm 38 years old, and this understanding made you flee, I remarked in frustration. Breaking through, shouldn't I already be aware of something so basic about myself? Leslie turned to face me, expression that is unreadable. We are given a single story to follow throughout our lives. Discover a man. Some of us simply take longer to question that story. Is that what happened with you? I asked. Marry him, have kids. When I realized that I had never inquired about her personal path, she said simply. However, society has a way of making you question even your most fundamental beliefs. So it wasn't always simple. I couldn't take my eyes off her face as the sun painted them in deep shade and warm gold. Although most people don't rush across state, she continued gently. You're not the first person to be confused by feelings for me. Lines to avoid them. And her candor made me giggle. Was I that? Her admission hung between us, altering everything, which was only apparent to someone who shared her feelings. I don't understand what to do with this. I told you that you don't need to do anything. She responded that emotions don't call for action, but as she did, she took a step. Her hand encircled mine on the railing, warm and steady, and I didn't back down. I just need you to stop, she said. I'm running. As the observatory dome rose above us, and the first stars emerged through its glass panels, I found myself leaning toward her in that protected area between day and night, pulled by unknown forces or resist as her lips first reluctantly touched mine. Then with increasing assurance, the kiss was completely different from anything I had ever experienced, not better or worse, but softer and more with purpose. Her hand reached up to gently hold my face, causing my chest to throb as we separated, overwhelmed with mixed feelings of excitement, anxiety, relief, and want. Leslie observed me as I processed everything with patience and steadfastness, which I found difficult to find. She concluded her statement by saying, if you want the kiss to change, just do that. Leslie and I carried on with our work at the reserve, despite everything and nothing. But there was now a faint electrical current that gave even the most routine exchanges a sense of importance, and we cautiously navigated each other's testing. You're overanalyzing once more as you acquire a new language of looks and fleeting touches. Leslie saw one. I could almost hear the gears turning as we went over the trail to camera film that evening, and she wasn't mistaken every single time. 3 weeks after our observational kiss, our interaction felt like navigating uncharted territory without a map. Nothing is more personal than holding hands and sharing goodnight kisses, not out of a lack of desire, but rather because of I rubbed my temples and said, I apologize for the prolonged hesitation. This is all new territory, in my opinion. Leslie's smile was patient Mary. There is no hurry or deadline. My phone interrupted us with a call from an unknown number, so we had to follow. I need to talk to you about the Emerald Valley Wildlife Series, he said, looking for Vincent's voice. Mary, I stopped the Emerald Valley project because Geographic wanted joint billing. Vincent had only joined me on the trip, which isn't occurring. Vincent, you didn't take a break from all of my work. He claimed that because of my connections, we were able to obtain all of those pictures, for which I supplied crucial logistical support, restricted locations, and your links. I noticed an increase in my blood pressure. Leslie saw my worried look worsen as you tried to take those professional contacts away from me. I've already spoken to the editor, Vincent added, and it's clear from her eyes that they believe a husband. The wife photography duo will sell more. Tomorrow, I'm flying to Fort Worth to talk about the specifics, and we'll have dinner together. I made a significant correction to it through my ex-husband, and there is nothing else to talk about. Leslie came next to me, her presence anchoring me as she hung up, her hands quivering with anger. Vincent is attempting to take credit for my work, so I reiterated that he would want to have me have him when he visits Fort Worth tomorrow. In all seriousness, the picture of our grumpy old bobcat Leslie unintentionally imprisoned in a cage made me. Leslie nodded. I should handle this myself, even though it's tempting to laugh despite my anger. You certainly can. But that simple statement doesn't mean you have to do it alone. Vincent hit me with unexpected force, but you don't have to handle it alone. Always fought my battles alone, even when we were supposed to be partners. The next afternoon, Vincent called. I consented to meet him there from the reserve's visitor center, with Leslie joining me for moral support. His countenance altered as soon as he saw us coming together, evaluating and recalculating Mary. He kissed me on the cheek, but I didn't return the kiss. He then turned to face Leslie and said, "And you are Leslie King Reserve," she said calmly, "manager," and her handshake was purposefully stiff, so that Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. I actually interrupted Mary to give us some solitude to talk about business. Leslie is staying, and if I said anything about my profession to her, the conversation swiftly soured. Vincent alternated between making references to our common past and subtly threatening his sector. Leslie came out, "Mr. Cox," after he implied that I was being sentimental about the picture credits. Her voice was chilly but measured. I looked over Mary's contract with National Geographic, and there isn't any mention of shared credit on the Emerald Valley series. Any effort to make a different claim could be considered fraud. Expression hardened. I had no idea that photographers now required legal counsel. When someone tries to steal their work, they need champions. Leslie spoke calmly, shifting his eyes between us. "I see what's happening here," he added dismissively, laughing. "Found yourself a guard dog, Mary?" "Get out," I replied gently, "and I'll lodge a formal protest if you get in touch with the magazine about my projects once again." Knowing that the activity would aid in processing information, Leslie went me to track the movements of nocturnal creatures later that evening. Leslie's hand remained steady in mine as we followed owl sounds through the darkness, while I was furious beneath the Texas sky. Arrived at her cabin with strong feelings after the altercation and the private darkness that surrounded us when something changed as she kissed me in the doorway. Her hands became tangled in my hair, and we moved. Her hesitancy turned to confidence. Leslie's touch was kind but assured as she guided us through the cabin, removing layers of inhibition with our clothes. With silent patience and in the comfort of her bed, I navigated uncharted ground and found aspects of myself that our bodies communicated a language that my intellect was still learning, but my heart had been dormant for years, maybe forever. After watching the moonlight dance across Leslie's naked shoulder, I felt as though I already knew something, a clarity so deep it made me cry uncontrollably. Replaced the perplexity that had tormented me for weeks. "Are you all right?" Leslie whispered, noting the sweat on my cheeks. "Sure." I answered the natural history question honestly for the first time in a long time. I was asked to present my wildlife photography at the Museum of Fort Worth's annual Conservation Awareness event. I chose some of my best pieces from the reserve this month, including a few unscripted photos of Leslie tending to injured animals. These pictures conveyed more than just documentation. They showed the deep bond between a woman and the forest she safeguarded. The gallery was crowded with art critics, environmental activists, and I stood anxiously beside my Falcon series, observing wildlife enthusiasts react. Leslie had been unexplainably gone all day, stating that her work kept her busy with reserve business. Remarkable remarks made by a museum curator about the champagne flute in hand, particularly these. I praised them for the remarkably intimate photos of our reserve manager. She was uncomfortably conscious that strangers could clearly see the intimacy, which the collection captured, falling in love with Leslie King, an older man, frame by frame. When a man looked at a picture of Leslie healing an injured hawk, one may assume that something. Before I could reply, I noticed Vincent coming in with a young blonde on his arm and my stomach. He nodded right away and walked through the crowd toward me, grinning like if our previous encounter hadn't ended badly. He gestured around the room and said, "Impressive exhibition," while his partner walked up to the refreshment table. "Though I'm noticing a theme with your new favorite subject." His tone said that he went about his business as usual. I'm confident that Smile Leslie's work offers outstanding visual content. Offers, he said with a sly smile, since Fort Worth art circles are already conversing. Heat rushed to my face as a wildlife photographer discovered a new species to examine. Shame but rage. Whatever you're saying, Mary, you're there. Gwendolyn's, as she got closer with the cocktail in hand. Her voice broke the tension. She glanced at Vincent briefly before pulling. "I apologize for interrupting, but you must meet someone safely across the room," she whispered, who invited the former museum director, who appeared to be ready to kill. I took a reassuring breath when Vincent hinted that he was contributing to their endangered species fund. Our stories about Leslie and me. Wendy pondered as she sipped her drink, whether it would be so awful if others were aware of the. Leslie and I hadn't talked about making our relationship public, so this question threw me off guard. We lived in a, I don't know, but I acknowledged Leslie's protective bubble of solitude when we saw each other mostly at the reserve or her cabin. Been harmed previously? Gwendolyn asked cautiously if she had ever mentioned Rebecca from the National Park Service to you. Rebecca, after 3 years of dating, received a position that forced her to go to Washington, so she asked Leslie to. Maintaining confidentiality turned out to be a professional way of acting, as though they were just buddies everywhere but behind closed doors. Wendy's face darkened, and she said, "Leslie deserves someone who's proud to stand beside her." Sudden force had I been keeping Leslie at a safe distance to safeguard my professional appearance at the price of respecting our developing relationship before I could think things through more. Leslie, when she arrived at the door, she had changed out of her typical ranger uniform for a basic black dress that completely changed her appearance. Her red hair cascaded in gentle waves about her shoulders, and our gazes locked. She moved across the packed room while everything else briefly dimmed, in my direction, receiving congrats from reserve donors who identified her as. She came over to me and briefly touched my hand. "Your work is breathtaking," she remarked. "So are you," I said with sincere pride, not considering myself a photographer. "Mind if I get a shot of the artist and her subject together?" I was asked by someone from the local paper, but I was hesitant. Leslie saw my delay, and her countenance cooled as she became momentarily aware that Vincent was observing from the other side of the room. Perhaps a little later, she informed the photographer in a courteous manner, and the remainder of the evening was spent in tense talk. She kicked off her heels with remarkable force as we eventually pulled off the drive to Leslie's cabin, which was silent inside. I remarked, "Something's bothering you," and she asked bluntly, "Are you ashamed of this? Of us?" I objected. "Of course not. So why did you freeze at that? Why did you present me to everyone tonight as the reserve manager instead of her when the photographer requested our photo? I'm still working this out, so I'm not sure what I am to you. I told you my whole identity has changed over the past few months, and I'm not embarrassed about it. I'm adjusting, and it doesn't need to be secret," she retorted, not prepared to be seen in public with me. Perhaps we should reevaluate our course of action once the dispute became more heated. Leslie disclosed her dread of being used as a test subject, and I shared my own fear of judgment following decades of meticulously conforming to social norms. And when tears took the place of words, we withdrew to separate rooms for the first time since we fell in love. And 3 days of quiet came after our disagreement. I spent a lot of time processing pictures for a magazine deadline, while Leslie put in long hours at the reserve. And as the hours went by, the gap between us became wider and wider until, on the 4th morning, I woke up to a realization that was so clear it felt absurd that I had never seen it in my life, catching truthful moments with my camera. But I had been scared to confront the most significant truth of all I held dear. Leslie King was not an experiment nor a phase. But I suddenly realized what I needed to do. Do I make an urgent appeal to the museum director over the phone, and then spend the next 48 hours in a creative frenzy? I was resting while I got my surprise ready, and when it was complete, I contacted Leslie, saying, "Come see me at the museum at 7:00 p.m. Please." I anxiously paced the deserted exhibition space, wondering if she would arrive. At 7:15, I heard footsteps. Leslie emerged in the hallway in her reserve uniform, her face guarded, asking, "What's this about?" She responded, keeping her distance. "Mary, I needed to show you something," I said. She gestured toward the main gallery and asked, "A new exhibition?" Her curiosity got the better of her. With hesitation, she trailed me into the dimly lit area where a number of enormous... Her breath hitched when she recognized the fresh collection of photographs that had not previously been there. Love in Natural Light chronicled our tale from start to finish. Leslie, her silhouette against a stormy window in the cabin during her speech at the fundraiser, our hands almost touching as, when we initially started tracking wildlife, she grinned right at my camera, her eyes in the center hung with trust. The biggest piece is a self-portrait I took of Leslie's head, lying on the falcon nesting grounds at sunrise. "The moment I knew you did this," Leslie wrote on the placard beneath my shoulder, as we both grinned in the golden sunshine. I said, "I'm done hiding." As I moved slowly through the gallery for everyone to see, I only replied, "You were right." She turned to face me, her eyes lighting. "What's the point of all this if I can't recognize what matters most to me?" I pointed to Green Eyes, asking when this exhibition would begin. I called everyone nature as the museum employees opened the doors to let the invited people in. Leslie's eyes widened in fear as his colleagues in photography, conservation, and conservation donated. "Are you certain about this, Mary?" As soon as the first guests arrived, I boldly held her hand and stopped worrying what other people think of me. The room filled up fast, and Gwendolyn came up and gave me the thumbs up. Even Vincent seemed unreadable as he looked at the pictures in the gallery as I described my artistic process to a group of reporters when Vincent came along, giving Leslie a courteous gesture before yanking me away. "Well done." He surprised me by saying, "Best I've seen from you," to which I nervously replied, "Thank you." He looked at Leslie, who was observing, and said, "I was wrong about you, Mary. You were always the real artist between us carefully. And I apologize for what I said at your previous exhibition. Sometimes, jealousy makes me a jerk before I can." He replied, "I'm starting a wildlife conservation magazine, and we could use your talent both." He gave me a business card, of yours, in fact, and he returned to the crowd after that, briefly leaving me stunned as visitors mixed with sitting beneath the pictures of our developing romance. Leslie drew me into a peaceful nook and said, "You didn't have to do. We could have found another way," she replied quietly, adding, I confessed, I did it for myself too. I'm done living half a life. For you," smiled then, the dazzling smile that had caught my eye months before. When she pulled a document out of her bag, she added, "Maybe you'd be interested in this." Inside was a plan for it. Working together to produce a book that details endangered animals in Texas reserves. She requested her eyes after conducting study with my photography partners, demonstrating both professional respect and, in response, I kissed her there, surrounded by people I love deeply, pictures of our trip and those who had now seen our reality. And when we said goodbye, there was cheering led by Gwendolyn and, despite all of my meticulous preparations and expectations, the crowd's unexpected laughter had discovered my true life via a new perspective that showed me not just the environment around me, but also the truth within. And throughout the evening, Leslie's hand stayed securely in mine. Realized that some moments just imprint themselves, and that some pictures don't need to be recorded on film to stay forever. On your heart, gradually becoming the most exquisite image of Mary's. The healing process from divorce to genuine love demonstrates how true freedom arises when we bravely dare to reinvent your tale and discover your light for more. By embracing your true self. Inspirational tales of change and the bravery to love freely. Sign up today to find stories that speak to you with your spirit.